So in this video, we're going to look at 5 tips if you want to start reading the classics. A lot of people think they would like to enjoy the classics and get into them, but they are often worried that they might be too stodgy or they're not educated enough to read them. Well, by the end of this video, you will know exactly what to do to start reading the classics, and we'll bust the myth that the classics are only for a certain type of people. So if you enjoy books and you like the classics or want to learn more about the classics, be sure to subscribe and ring the bell so that you never miss a video around the topics we talk about, which is always the classics on this channel. So let's sally forth and look into it, shall we? Tip number 1 when it comes to starting to read the classics is to demystify them as a whole. You have to see the classics for what they actually are at base level. They are stories, yarns, tales, and a bit of escapism, written for ordinary folk like me and you. Yes, they have merit above many other works of literature, but at heart they are still stories. The pleasantness of classics isn't forced. It comes from a place of finding you have discovered something about yourself. Their beauty lies within the shape and form of stories, not within the vice of academia, whose swollen books and pompous catechisms would bleed dry the beating heart of old tales. Within the classics, a voice is given to the sensations and the reasons common to a king all the way to a tramp. There is exquisite beauty and luxury in the classics. The whole gamut of human experience is written on their golden pages. You have diamonds of discernment, rubies of romance, sapphires of satire, emeralds of eloquence, all waiting for the one who just dips in their hand and takes hold of what's there. So don't think at all that you need to be educated to the level of a degree in order to read the classics. After all, where did the learned men learn their learned wisdom? Was it not from the books of old? So you too should be dipping in, remembering that these classic works were written for all people. That's one of the reasons why they're a classic. They sum up the emotion, the desires, the ambitions, the thinking, the goals, the way of perceiving things of people of all time that has never ever changed. And so when you enter into reading the classics, just enjoy the story, because within the story you will find carefully crafted all sorts of observations that you as a person will identify with, and you will engage on a discussion and a disputation with the author of those works. Yes, a classic has more merit than regular literature. It has earned its place in the stakes of worth. However, these books should not be put in a pantheon where they're tended on by an ecclesiastical elite and us commoners have to fear to disturb them. So, step number 1, do not worry about the classics. Demystify them. They are books written to tell stories, and it's the stories that you should enjoy. As you read and enjoy the story, you'll find why the classics are the classics. Tip number 2, trot, don't gallop. There's a circumstance linked to books, but peculiar to the classics, that anyone trying to read them wants to have read lots of them very quickly. And with the classics, there's this common idea to read 100 of them. And maybe that's down to all those lists. And it's certainly not helped by those videos you find of people who say they read 20 books a week or 200 books a month. You know the ones I mean. Darling, I'm just off to have a bath. I shall only be an hour. I'm not saying there's anything wrong with reading fast. However, do not try to get into your mind that you won't have to read 50 to 100 classics in order to be well read. It's simply not the case. In fact, reading through books quickly in order to say you've read them is pretty pointless. Can you imagine a person saying to you, oh yes, I went to the Savoy recently and ate the entire menu in 15 minutes? You'd think what a wally. Why wouldn't you take your time to enjoy it? Now that's the same with the classics. They speak to the soul. They are so well crafted that we recognise ourselves clearly within them, and they challenge us over our own beliefs and our own perspectives, sometimes correcting us, even chastising us. But if we just rush through, yes, we might get the tale because they are stories, but we may miss the beauty and the luxury. And that's why you should trot. Don't start looking at page numbers as you're reading. Just enjoy the story and take time to chew it over like the fine food or the fine wine that it is. I'll just give you an example. In the picture of Dorian Gray, page 1, you just get these comments. Lord Henry Wotton could just catch the gleam of the honey-sweet and honey-coloured blossoms of a laburnum, whose tremulous branches seemed hardly able to bear the burden of a beauty so flame-like as theirs. The sullen murmur of the bees shouldering their way through the long unmown grass. The dim roar of London was like the bourdon note of a distant organ. Now, didn't you get the sense of atmosphere and that evocative description of a sultry day, heavy laden with the oppressive heat of a humid sun, with the distant drone of the bourdon organ note, which represents the city in the background, that constant deep note thrumming. And even the bees were tired. And imagine, you could turn one of those sentences into a compliment. Imagine saying to somebody that, how do they bear the burden of a beauty so flame-like as theirs? I mean, swits woo, win me over. Someone said it about me. So there's much to be taken by just reading it and enjoying it. Don't race to finish. In fact, don't even put yourself under pressure to read one classic a week. If you prefer other literature, it could be YA literature, it could be fantasy fiction, sci-fi fiction, whodunits, murder mysteries, thrillers, suspenses, you name it. Keep reading those and maybe make it your goal to read one classic per month, if you can fit that in. And you'll begin to enjoy them, and I bet they will start to win you over as their favourite books. So that's tip number 2. Trot along, don't try and gallop through the books. You'll actually wind yourself. Tip number 3 is one I think you might really like, although I expect to hear some people swooning and fainting as they listen to the heresy that I'm about to say. Before reading a classic book, why not go and watch the TV drama or film that is based upon that book? This is a great way to start reading the classics. The reason is you get a sense of the costume and the background, a little detail to the history, and you get familiar with the way that these people talk, because in some of the classics there is a more formal way of speaking at times, particularly in high society. Not only that, but if there are any parts of the story when you read the classic that seem maybe a little complicated or you're not sure what's going on, having watched the screenplay beforehand, you won't have any issue whatsoever. And it will aid your imagination. Or read the book and then watch the TV show. Either way, it does you a world of good. It makes you more familiar and engaged with the book that you're reading. Honestly, try it. It's a brilliant method for getting into the classics. Tip number 4. Get a highlighter and a pencil and scribble all over your book as you read it. And I'm obviously not suggesting that you do this to a £50 hardback edition. There's the Collins classics, the Wordsworth classics. They are £2 a pop, I think they are. Get those, and as you're going through the classics, highlight sentences that you just like the way they're written. Maybe it's a way of describing something. Recently, I came across just a delicious little phrase to explain the late afternoon light coming in through some patio windows. It just said, an apricot glow spread over everything through the patio windows. An apricot glow. What a way to see the world. And when you highlight those, you can go back and pick some, print them out, stick them on a fridge, not so you can say, yeah, yes, I remember that Dostoevsky said. None of that. Let's not be snobbish. But if it's a good phrase, use it in your day-to-day language, and it will influence the way you think about the world around you. You'll end up adding colours to your palette and painting a richer scene of life as you go through it with silver feet. Another thing to do when you're going through a book is to write little notes. Now you might say, well, I don't know what notes to write. I don't know what the important parts of the book are. Remember point 1, demystify the classics. Don't think that you're supposed to have an academic outlook and only with a degree can you find important parts of the book. That's nonsense. It is a story which will speak to you in a unique way based on your experiences. So as you go through, you just write in the margins bits you find interesting. Try and guess what happens next. If a character turns up, jot down your first impression. Try and work out what you're supposed to feel by the words that are used to describe that character on their first appearance. Can you guess if X will marry Y, or if S will hate T? Whatever that may be. And then as you go on later and draw and see what happens, then you can celebrate when you find yourself in harmony with the author, or you might be challenged by what happens, not expecting it at all. And as you take these notes, one thing will stand out. You'll begin to perceive the author's opinion slightly rubbing off on the characters. And then you really begin to fall into the book. It starts to become a part of you. Not because you've put in loads of thought, but just because you've trotted through and took the time to think and note. So that's tip number 4. Get a highlighter, get a pencil, and attack the book as you go along. You'll love it. The last tip, tip number 5, is before reading a classic book, go onto YouTube or some other site or wherever and find a video that gives you a summary of the plot. Not spoilers, but a summary of the plot, and see if it appeals to you. Don't just pick up a book that actually isn't going to appeal to you at all. Also, once you've finished the book, go on YouTube and watch a review. Look up a book review from someone you like listening to, because they will have at least read the book and took the time to think and engage with it. And by doing that, they may shed some light or a different perspective on the book that you've just read. And if you've been noting and highlighting on your way through, you'll really become engaged with their reasoning and the book will take on a life of its own, and it will never ever leave you for the rest of your life. So there we have it. 5 tips for starting your journey in the classics. Number 1, demystify them. They are stories first and foremost. They do not need to be approached with an academic level of intellect. Number 2, trot along, don't gallop. Enjoy the descriptions. Enjoy reading the story and the classic. Don't be in a haste to get to another classic, to get to 100 classics in a year. If you read 10 in a year, you'll have enjoyed it, believe me. Number 3, watch a TV or a film program based upon the classics first. It's amazing how shocked you are when you read the classic afterwards. My example, when I watched Last of the Mohicans with Daniel Day-Lewis, in which he spends 40 minutes just legging it about in the forest, you find that 3 of the characters that die in the film don't die at all in the book. And amazingly, the characters that don't die in the film do die in the book, and one of them is an absolute shocker. Also, what happened to the scene with the bear? That was left out. So watch the programme. It helps you visualize things if you're not familiar with the time period or the setting. It also gets you familiar with the story before you go into it, which irons out any wrinkles as you go. Number 4, I think this is the one I'd recommend most of all, is to go through the book with a highlighter and a pencil. Don't force yourself to highlight things. There can be reams of pages that just don't present anything of interest to you, but have that highlighter ready for a line that you really like, a phrase that really tickles your fancy. Have your pencil ready to judge characters, to guess plot lines, to anticipate the author's ideas. By doing this, you will become immersed in a classic book. And the classics, one of their great features is their ability to engage with your soul. And tip number 5 was, of course, either before or after reading the classic, watch a video. Get someone else's perspective, someone that's took the time to think about the meanings of the book for them. And perhaps you'll agree with them or disagree with them, but it will take you in a different route. And a person who truly thinks upon the classics properly develops a sympathetic eye. They are never quick to judge other people, as the classics normally teach you that there is not one single way of looking at something. I hope you've enjoyed this video, and don't forget to hit the subscribe button and ring the bell so that you don't miss out on any videos where we discuss some books more in depth or go through more tips for how to get more out of your reading and taking it on to a new level.